order. There we go. Okay. All right. So I will now call to order at 6 o'clock the January meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board. If we don't approve the agenda, we just approve the minutes? We don't approve the agenda, I guess. That's already.
Just
Okay.
the minutes.
All right, so I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last month. No, somebody else to make the motion. I will entertain a motion.
Oh, you will entertain.
I make the motion to approve the minutes of last meeting.
Do we have a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, so minutes are approved from October 28th. Do we have any public comment this evening? Okay. Okay, so I will turn it over to Stephen to start with the substantive agenda items, starting with the 2020 work plan.
Now it's on. Thank you. So what we wanted to talk about tonight was primarily all the work items for 2020. A lot of them you've already heard before, but we're going to continue all of the same conversations and hopefully go to finalize most of those policy updates that we had talked about, but more importantly, the mobility master plan. But I also want to talk to you kind of near the end of the presentation about other topics that you might be interested in including as part of your work. Some of that we'll talk about as part of the mobility master plan, as part of implementation, but is there any other topics that we haven't talked about, or is there something that you want to explore in your particular interest? So I'll have that question for you later on. I'll let you contemplate on that. So as you know, the Mobility Master Plan is going to be the city's long-range planning document looking at 20-plus years of investments for transportation. It's going to replace the transportation element in our comprehensive plan, so it'll hold all of the guiding policies that currently has, and they'll basically be two mirrored documents. We have to have the transportation element in the comp plan as part of completing the whole comp plan and what's required for the Growth Management Act. And as you remember, in 2019, we took on a big public engagement process to develop guiding principles, which helped us develop essentially the primary policies that are going to fill the Mobility Master Plan. And with the help of the other boards and commissions, we formed network policies that will help us define how we want a future network to look like for all modes, not just specific modes. And then for 2020, you can probably look at attachment A and attachment B in your handouts, and it shows the current and old schedule. There's changes that I want to point out between the two, and the first being that there's been a couple delays. The first being when the tab was working on the policies, it took a little extra time just to make sure that everybody was comfortable with the policies moving forward. And so that created a very small delay on the schedule. The other part was council availability near the end of the year. We originally planned to go to council before going to a drafting of the plan, but that wasn't available to us because the council needed to focus on the budget. So that actually is created kind of a 3-month delay in the project schedule. So it went from June adoption in 2020 to September adoption in 2020. It's not a huge delay or major change in terms of how we're going to be operating later on, but it is a change in the schedule from what you originally saw. The other part that's changed compared to what was originally the schedule back in like June of 2019 is the sequencing. So if you look at the old schedule, there's like 2 or 3 touches with city council. That's changed so that we can maximize the efficiency of not only the tab, but also with council. Because if you look at the new schedule, the current schedule, there's going to be a touch with council pretty much every month starting in April. And a lot of that's going to have lead time with the tab with the previous month. So in April, we'll have a policy discussion with council. In March, we're going to have a policy discussion with the tab to kind of prepare for that council discussion. And in April, that'll be a joint session with the TAB chairs and City Council to talk about all the draft policies that's being proposed for the Mobility Master Plan and kind of the reasoning behind a lot of it. Any questions before I move on?
Do we have dates for these meetings? Can you get them on the calendar?
Yes, I will send all the dates out once they're finalized. Right now, they're looking at the first study session of each month. But once I have that finalized, I will send it all out to you. The next, any other questions? Sorry, before I go to complete streets. Okay. The other major policy that we're going to be looking at updating this year is complete streets. This is in line with the Mobility Master Plan and developing the tools that we need to implement the Mobility Master Plan. The complete streets policy is the city's commitment that we're going to have a balanced system, a balanced network of modes using our roadways, and that we're going to prioritize all the modes equally. It's not to say that's going to happen everywhere, but it's really defining and giving us direction how to really do that. Because the current policy that's in city code just says we want a balanced roadway and doesn't really give much direction, so it hasn't really been that helpful. And so we're updating a lot of that. We're going to provide direction on what that actually means for staff and the community. And you all saw a draft of that back in October, so you'll see another draft of that next month prior to the council meeting that we're hoping to get reviewed by council. Any questions on that before I move on? Okay. The next is the pedestrian crossing guidelines. This is a document that the city uses to first design many of our crossings for pedestrians, bicyclists, and our roadways, but also has the policies on says where we should be putting those type of crossings. Currently, those policies aren't well defined, and that's part of what this update is to give us more detail on what those policies should be, but also more updated tools on what type of crossings we can have. Currently, it doesn't identify any bike or green paint, any of the newer type of crossings that we've seen in the last 5 to 6 years. That's become available to a lot of the cities. So a lot of that's going to be included in this new new guidelines to help staff identify where and how things will get installed. That's something that we've talked about before, but you haven't really seen a draft of that yet. That's going to be coming later on. Any questions on that? I was expecting more questions from you guys.
I have a general question when you get to the end, but okay, I'll just ask it now, I guess. And that's, so the complete streets, the crossing guidelines, and the traffic calming policies, just to be clear, I understand our role. I feel like I'm always asking the same questions over again, but because we don't meet that often and I seem to forget from one meeting to the next, but I guess it feels like a silly question, but just, we've seen some of this material. Is this body actually making a recommendation to council, or are you just kind of running it by us to get it? Is it really a staff recommendation that this board has seen? I mean, are we putting forth something to council, and what does that transmittal look like? Or is it just something we just give you some feedback, but it's really a staff recommendation to council? I just want to be clear what our role is.
So when we bring these policies to you, like the complete streets as a policy that we're going to update, we're going to be asking for your recommendation. That's something that you'll vote on, okay, that we will transmit to the city council when we bring it to the council.
And do you usually have somebody from the committee as part of that transmittal process, or is that just not defined yet, or is that?
Well, we haven't done this with you yet, so it's really.
Well, I guess that's kind of why I'm asking the question. This would be our first actual, aside from our bylaws, which we get to kind of choose for ourselves, would this not be the first thing we've actually first product we would be transmitting to council?
It would be.
And so I just want to be kind of mindful of that process, and we don't want to make it overly resource intensive, and yet if it is going to represent, this board, then perhaps there's a role to then be part of that transmittal.
As I know right now, there's no formal expectation that you either attend or you transmit the recommendation yourself. Typically, it's done through staff. Staff will go to the council and say, this was the board's recommendation, and answer any questions that the council maybe have about our conversations, but typically, it's not you going to council meeting and handing it to.
Not necessarily. I wouldn't expect it to be us going to council meeting presenting it, but it just seems like that transmittal might be something we would want to be involved in. I mean, that's how it worked when I worked on the planning commission before. It was usually the chair or the vice chair, which I'm not trying to sign up for any more work, but I don't know what the rest of you feel, but it feels like if we're going to be an influential body that brings recommendations that we've put work into, seems like attaching a representative from this board sort of would be prudent, but maybe that's just not how things are done in the city. I don't know.
Yeah, or like a letter of recommend, or a letter from the
There's
board
something about the interchange, the transmission and the interchange and like carrying back and carrying forth the messages that, not that the staff can't do it, but it just seems like it's a richer conversation if it's,
from the citizens. I mean, from
from the people that,
representatives,
that spent time with it or whatever. So if it is in fact our recommendation, which obviously is heavily influenced by staff's hard work, you do all the work. But anyway, I don't know. So I just wanted to get clear on that, and certainly not insistent, but I guess I would ask us to consider whether we want to do that.
It'll be entirely up to the board how you want to do that, but I will talk with the city clerk if there's any expectations in terms
And
of like how we
I'd
can
also
do
be
that.
curious what's customary.
Yeah, like does the Parks Board, when they do their pro plan, do they, wear green hats? I don't know.
I'm not sure how the Parks Board has actually transmitted to, so I'll have to check with them and the city clerk in terms of like how that's been transmitted from board and commission to city council, but typically the way I've seen it is a letter of recommendation or something gets submitted as part of the staff report, formalizing that transmittal to city council and the staff report, and then someone might attend as part of public comment and speak on that. Otherwise, there's no any other way to do it that I know of. So I'll touch base with you on that
Okay.
later, once I talk with the city clerk.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I know that I wasn't a chair or vice chair, but I know they generally transmitted our recommendations when I was on the planning commission, and I just remember there was a lot of rich discussion about some of the more, I don't want to say controversial, but things that were more involved and had more, there was more background, there was more like things that we considered, and it was just a rich discussion on some of the harder questions. And if we're going to set up for delivering the mobility master plan, and we want to build trust and confidence in us as a body, that's all. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll just encourage Stephen, transportation manager, just to add on to some of the comments Stephen made. So first of all, you're a new board, and we're still developing our relationship with the council. So I think one thing for sure, we want to make sure we're following process when we'll check on the clerk with that as far as how boards, what their role is in presenting to council. But I think, back to what Stephen was saying, you all should think about how you'd like to do that and propose how you'd like to do that. I don't think it would be out of line, especially with these first couple of things, to at least be there at the council meetings in case some questions come up. You are, after all, the recommending body on all transportation issues to the city council, so it shows commitment and interest for you to be there, whether you actually make a presentation or not. So I'd encourage that personally, but I think, again, as Stephen says, it's up to you and the city clerk.
Sure.
Does that help answer your question
Yes.
a little bit?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll follow up with you on what kind of our options are.
Oh, and then Stephen, I have
Yes.
not on this point, but actually on the crossing guidelines, if we're ready to. So I think I vaguely remember at the end of the October meeting, we had gone through some of the sort of the documents we were going to use to define how we implemented some of this. And I remember we were talking about whether it's AASHTO or, you know, whatever the standards were that were out there. So when you bring us stuff around like crossing guidelines and stuff, is that sort of the source data you're going to be bringing us? Is like, these are sort of the different types of recommendations we have, and what these, you know, what sort of the, you know, the best in the business or the brightest brains in the business think we should be doing as far as implementing. So it's going to be sort of more like recommendations that come out of those kind of bodies.
Yeah, so in terms of like the engineering standards or the technical side of it, we're just updating all the modern tools that we have available to us.
Okay.
What we'll bring to you is the policy questions of how often should we put a crosswalk in, or in what locations should we prioritize for crosswalks, those type of policy questions.
Okay, those types of questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, versus like the,
Versus should we put in a rapid flashing beacon or flags?
Okay.
Like those kind of things, there's a lot more technical criteria we can use to guide us on those.
Okay.
But for the policies of,
okay, so, but we're going to take a step back and talk more at the policy level.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just confirming.
we would need a few more meetings to talk about
Yeah,
that.
that's why I was like, what level of detail are we going into? Do we want green crossings or blue crossings? I'm kidding. I know that's color coded for a reason.
Any other questions? Okay. Traffic calming, along the same lines. And one thing I should mention is a lot of how we move forward on all these other policy updates and updating our tools is kind of working around the mobility master plan. So if one meeting's going to need a longer conversation on the mobility master plan, this might get pushed to another meeting or delayed, which is okay, because a lot of these policy updates are part of the implementation of the mobility master plan anyway. So we want to make sure that we have enough time for the mobility master plan and save these for times where we have that extra time. With the traffic calming policy, a lot of what we had talked about last October, was a general direction and general feeling of approach we want to have with this policy. And a lot of what this policy is going to do is update how we address traffic calming issues. Right now, there is a process defined in our policy, but it's very difficult to implement, and pretty much no one is happy with it, which kind of stemmed and led to us updating the policy in the first place. So when we come to you with the policy update, we're going to be talking about an approach that we want to go with that we think addresses a lot of the major concerns that people have brought up about the policy in the first place. Any questions on that? Okay. And there's other topics that we haven't really touched on that you might actually see this year. And the first being the transportation improvement program. And what this is a statewide requirement that we submit a document, the TIP, that has all of our transportation projects that comply with state regulations. This is part of the Growth Management Act and making sure that we are complying with a lot of the state and federal regulations around transportation. Typically, this was shown to the Planning Policy Commission, but now that we have you all, the Transportation Advisory Board, it actually seems more fitting for you to be reviewing this document when we put it together and then send it into the state every year. And the same goes for the capital improvement plan. The two are actually identical. We use what we developed in the capital improvement plan, which is developed actually every 2 years, to submit that information as our transportation improvement program to the state each year. How they all get formed might get impacted by the mobility master plan. We don't know that yet until we start to implement the mobility master plan into a lot of that other planning processes. So that's something that we will talk about later on. Any questions on those two? Those are ones that are a little more info. Okay. Other major topics that we might actually talk about this year is going to be transit and light rail. Two major topics for us, primarily because they're going to be that's going to be our primary mode to move the most people the most efficiently. And a lot of that's going to be depending on relationships with our transit agencies, but also how we develop our plan for what we want our transit system to look like in the future. We're not slated to be developing a transit plan until later next year, 2021, but we actually want to start the conversation sooner so that we get a little bit of a head start. And using some of this mobility master plan work to start some of that, but have those conversations of how to answer that question. What do we actually want a transit network to look like? Because currently what it looks like, nobody likes that much. We have people that use the transit centers, but we don't really know if they're all Issaquah residents. So is it really benefiting the Issaquah community? We want to answer those kind of questions when we look at transit later on. And then another major work item for the city this year is going to be the implementation of the citywide strategic plan. A lot of that relates to how we implement the mobility master plan, but we might come to you with policy questions related to implementation of transit, of near-term projects, how to prioritize some of those. Some of that will be kind of driven by the mobility master plan, but we'll come to you with those kind of policy questions. Any questions on those two? Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
Are there any topics that, and I kind of want to open the floor a little bit because I'm going to go into the mobility master plan schedule a little more detail. Are there any other topics that you all are interested in and don't see on this list? And that could be related to some of your review of the planning documents that you kind of looked at as part of your homework, but, and we'll talk about that later. But I just wanted to open the floor for any other topics that you would want to see.
I actually did have a comment.
Yes.
So I was looking at the Redmond Master Mobility Plan, and they had a section dedicated to parking, and I thought that would be beneficial to add into our policy development.
So in terms of other topics for the tab, is there anything, do you want to have a meeting or an agenda item on parking where you learn a little bit more about what the city is doing?
I'd say yes, looking at some of the others, they addressed parking.
Okay.
And I think it'd be good to talk about what parking we have here and how it can be used or changed or addressed.
Okay. Any other topics that you can think of right now? We'll talk about elements of the master plan a little bit later, but in terms of like our meetings and agendas, is there anything else that you might want to see? Okay.
I bet Nina will have something to.
I'm sure Nina will have some topics she would like to bring up. We'll follow up with her later.
I do have a question about
Yes.
Traffic calming. With other modes of transportation, such as transit and light rail, are we talking about possible line bikes or stuff along that, or in that vein, or is that just walk and roll when that comes into play? Like, how are we incorporating that, if at all? Because I know it's come up a couple times. Do we want to plan for, not pedestrian, but not a normal bike?
Right. As part of what might get recommended out of this plan, and what we heard from a lot of people is they just want to see a lot more options. Mm-hmm. So how line bike or bike share or scooter share or whatever it might be, that will be something that we might tackle separate from even the walk and roll plan.
Okay.
Because that is something that's available now and something that a lot of people are trying to take advantage of. So it might be something, as soon as we adopt this plan, that there's a demand for scooter share or bike share, then staff and we'll start looking into it and work with you in terms of like any policy questions we might have around that.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to take a look a little closer at the mobility master plan schedule. What we're going to be doing this year, and for the next couple months, I'll just start with that. Following this meeting, we're going to be kicking off engagement in February through March and then into early April, leading up to the April 14th meeting with City Council, where we talk about draft policies that we're proposing to put into the plan. And what that may look like is looking at the major policies. So Vision Zero being one of those policies that this board has brought up a couple of times, of having emphasis on safety. How do we do that, and what that policy might look like, and talk about kind of the impacts of those policies. Maybe have example projects of what that may mean, and have that conversation with City Council, and that way we get a little better direction to now work on a project list and set priorities on priority criteria, so we can prioritize that project list and eventually lead to the draft plan. And that's essentially the sequence that'll start in April. So April is that policy discussion. May is finalizing the policy and then start talking about projects. June, we'll actually start talking about our prioritized project list. And then July, August, we'll have a draft review conversation with City Council leading up to adoption in September. And a lot of that is going to be having, the May meeting with Council will have the April meeting with the TAB to talk about the same topic. So we can go to Council with the TAB's recommendation on each of the topics.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
So with the public outreach that's happening in February, March, what is that outreach, or what does it look like, or topics, or?
Right now, we're looking at several stakeholder meetings. A lot of the people that have been interested in this process and developing the master plan, we're going to go to them and talk about a lot of the policies that we talked with you and the other boards and commissions. So the network policies of what it might look like for cyclists versus pedestrians versus the auto network, and answering questions that groups might have about freight or transit access. So it's going to them and saying, these are the kind of policies that the boards and commissions have helped us kind of refine. This is how it may impact you. So maybe having example projects, explaining, okay, this is what the policy may say. This is the projects that may come out of that. And we can't really say when that might happen, but this is kind of the impact on the community, on the stakeholders, and get feedback on if that's in the direction of what they originally told us, okay, or if they meant something else.
Okay, and then, so before you go out, will we have an opportunity to see what you're going to be presenting, or what policy questions you're going to be trying to address, or?
Yes. Yes. We're hoping to start many of the meetings in mid-February.
Okay.
So it's between now and our next meeting in February.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So yes, I can update you in terms of like the kind of information that'll be going out to everybody.
Yeah, even if you just email us links.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Follow-up to that, is that an open house is it internal, or is it really an open house for public to come in? Is it something that we can attend if we wanted to?
Most of the meetings will be public that we'll have in terms of like the stakeholder meetings. Right now, we're not planning to have a big open hall meeting because that hasn't really been very successful here, and we're trying to think about staff resources and making sure that we're efficient and effective with what we're planning for our engagement. And so far, the smaller stakeholder meetings, multiple smaller stakeholder meetings, seems to be more effective for a lot of getting feedback on our projects.
Okay.
But that may change later on if, let's say, a neighborhood association says they would like to have a big public meeting. We would do that.
Question?
Yes.
Can you tell me more about the council study session in January of 2020?
Yes, that was a week and a half ago, and it was canceled because of the snow. So we are updating council with a memo on a lot of the information that we are going to provide them in that study session. So it didn't happen, but we are still giving council the information about where we are in the process, and a lot of what changed in the schedule, what we're going to be talking about in April, and how to prepare for that.
Okay. It would be good to, if there's any substantive feedback that we should consider, just to understand where they're at. Because I feel like it's a little, I'm not really clear on where they stand on a lot of these issues, so it sounds like it's going to be more process than substance, but Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what they have to say when it gets to the substantive issues.
And I think a lot of what we may get is going to be coming at that April meeting. We're going to try to build up to that as much as possible to make sure that we have enough information for that conversation to be effective. But at the same time, we have to follow the council process on their conversations and use the study sessions that are scheduled. Any other questions on the schedule? Okay. So for the tab, we have your meetings at least planned out until June. And a lot of that is kind of depending on how the work progresses on the mobility master plan. But so far next month, we're hoping to bring to you a draft of the complete streets. Just a refined draft of what you saw last October, because we took a lot of your feedback and incorporated it into the language. And we have staff that's going to be reviewing that soon. So we'll have a draft hopefully for you by the end of February. And then the crossing guidelines is, if there's time to have that conversation about the crossing guidelines. Otherwise, that might get moved to another meeting. And then in March, we'll start talking about the draft policies for the mobility master plan, and then talk about some of our engagement. Since engagement will have just ended before the March meeting, we might not have the full results, but we'll talk about a lot of this, what we heard in the stakeholder meetings as part of our March meeting. And then April, we'll talk about finalizing those policies following the meeting with City Council on April 14th, and then kind of introduce the draft project list, which will help our conversation with Council in May. And then we'll talk about a prioritized project list in May, the TAB meeting in May, leading up to the June conversation with the City Council. And then the same goes for the June, talking about a draft and recommendation for City Council on the mobility master plan. Any questions on at least the draft schedule? Okay. Any expectations that you were hoping to see maybe in at least early this year? Okay. Well, do you want to just go into the board homework or open up to general questions?
You guys have any other questions about agenda item 3A?
Right.
All right, let's move on to 3B.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there's 2 twos. That would make it.
There are 2 twos.
Number 2?
Oh, hey, look at that.
That's why the 2 twos.
Okay, well, so over the winter break, we canceled the November and December meetings. To replace that, we asked the board to provide homework, or we provided you with homework, and asked you to talk with friends, colleagues, anyone in the community about mobility, and ask them some questions about what they know, and hopefully talk to them about some of the work that we're doing, at least the aim for a lot of the work, particularly with the mobility master plan. And what we were hoping to get from you is, one, get a couple more perspectives of other people who use the system and how they use it, and maybe identify major issues that you got out of those conversations with other people in the community. The other part that we're hoping to get out of that is potentially things that we haven't thought of before or haven't talked about yet that we would want to identify as part of the mobility master plan. And so we were just hoping to use your winter break to talk to more people. And now I'd like to kind of open up the floor to what you heard. Oh, the other part of your homework was to review planning documents, existing city planning documents, as well as the other planning documents from other agencies. So the transportation master plan for both, for City of Kirkland, City of Redmond, and City of Olympia. And I provided the City of Olympia because that was actually the most recent transportation master plan that I could find. And for some of you who went to the website and looked through it, they have a really cool story map instead of the planning document that you could look through explaining all all of their chapters and exactly what they're trying to do, which is part of the reason why I wanted you to go to that, just kind of see what a lot of the newer options are for presenting a lot of those master plans. So back to my other question, what did you hear in your conversations?
Should we just
Yeah.
start at one end
However
and
you
just
wanna do
go?
it.
I mean, it seems like we all probably have something to say. Just take them in turn. Do you want to start? Is that okay?
Yeah, no, it's you're the chair.
So yeah, in terms of like my interviews, I talked with a few family members and then also a friend who just moved back from Korea, so Seoul, and so she gave me a lot of insight about how in Seoul they use transportation in there. She said it was very intuitive to use different modes of transportation, and so it would be like riding the subway and then getting on a line bike and then maybe riding a bus to where you need to go, versus here it seems that the most intuitive form of transportation is just to get into your car, because that is the most accessible and easiest for a lot of people, and so that was something that I just wanted to bring to the board about thinking about how we can advise to make transportation more intuitive for other people.
All right, so I talked to a few family members, a few from Minnesota, and then a few students at the high school. And so what I got from like my family members, they mostly just said widen the roads. And so I tried to like explain how that wouldn't really work, but a lot of people are kind of stuck in that mindset. And so then I also talked to a few students at the high school, and they were saying how if you just tried to do something with the high school's traffic, like a lot of the other traffic would be alleviated. They were like, make a road behind the high school, try to like make more exits, stuff like that, build new roads, build different roads. Like they just want a solution to the traffic around the high school. And then I started asking about like other parts of the city, and talked about Front Street a little bit. And they said, well, widen the roads. And I'm like, okay, well, would you have to push all the buildings back? And they're like, okay, well, maybe you can't do that. And so that's kind of the farthest I got with them, just widen the roads, new roads, other places.
Okay, so yeah, I talked to a lot of my neighbors, and because I was trying to find people who lived in Issaquah, so I talked to a lot of neighbors in the community, and traffic was definitely a big frustration for people, and living on Newport with all these new communities being built up. So the question about, can our roads handle this kind of traffic, and do we have room for more people on the roads, et cetera. So a lot of those kind of comments around that. And then it's good you brought up parking, because parking was another thing. I think more and more people, and then it was funny because I wound up talking to somebody from North Bend about this too, but more and more people really see Issaquah as sort of where they go on a Friday night to go out and enjoy. So people will come from like North Bend or Carnation or wherever, and they come into Issaquah to have a night out, and they felt like the parking in our commercial district was sorely lacking. So that was one of the other big comments. But yeah, and then a couple of people I talked to who used the Issaquah Park and Ride were really happy with the location of the park and ride and with the capacity of the park and ride, as long as you get there before 9 o'clock, is what I heard. And then the frequency of bus routes and the efficiency of those bus routes, at least to get to downtown Seattle, because they were downtown Seattle commuters. So the efficiency of the bus routes from our park and ride to downtown Seattle was a very convenient connection.
Okay, so the first thing I was just going to say is I'm glad we did this, because it made me realize that for the people that I talked to, then they now know about this committee, and then I serve on this committee. So, and I finished by saying, if you have anything else come up, don't hesitate to give me a call. We don't have that much influence. We're just an advisory body, but it's just kind of nice to give people one more window in Touchpoint into the city to make it feel more like they have some control over the city they live in. So I didn't even think about that. That was a surprise, and I appreciated that. So I interviewed one my neighbor and another not too far, but also downtown Issaquah. So it's not super surprising what their questions were. And then I interviewed a woman who, for the past 6 years, has lived in Snoqualmie and Carnation, but commuted into Issaquah daily for daycare. And so I thought that would be a good mix of people. And so the first person I talked to talked a lot about trying to find an equitable way to figure out what to do about the pass-through traffic, primarily Front Street and Issaquah Hobart Road. And recognizing there's no simple answer, but about how to fix it, and also just really sort of asking the question about what is our responsibility, because he had the general sense that that we have an unfair burden that we're having to build, especially down the Front Street corridor to accommodate traffic that for people that aren't originating in Issaquah. And if I remember correctly, there is technology out there that can help us answer that question, but we haven't used that yet to get some definitive answers, or we don't have a sense of the percentage of people that pass through. So primarily Front Street is what comes up all the time, that are passed through, what their origin and destination is, right? We can, but we don't. We haven't done that yet.
We're actually in that process right now.
We're in that process right now.
Yeah, so
Okay.
one thing that's going to be released in the next week or two is our trends and conditions report, and that's going to include regional pass-through traffic and analysis on a lot of that. So we'll have percentages of people who either originate or end their trips in Issaquah during the AM or PM peak travel times, or people who don't stop in Issaquah at all. And so we'll have those percentages as part of this analysis. So
that will be, I mentioned that, and that was that individual was very interested.
And the way it works is we're using a company called Streetlight, which uses cell phone GPS data. And so
wouldn't have so much gridlock at certain times of the day, and people could continue on their way. So I thought that was interesting. Another interesting point that somebody brought up, which I thought was worth mentioning, when we do fill vacancies on this committee, we should, and maybe you've already thought of this, but thought it was worth mentioning, make sure that large employers have representation on this committee. So some of our big...
Like Costco.
Right. Right, and I know you have other outreach mechanisms to them directly, but it might be interesting for them to have representation on this committee. Yeah, people blocking the intersection was a big hot button. And then just an interest in maybe some smart technology to help inform people that maybe don't come here as often about when the best time is to come, but, and not come. So like people are mindful of school, let's not try to drive down Front Street at 3:30 in the afternoon, that's the types of things. And that's about it.
I'm kind of in a unique position because I run the restaurant, so I get to kind of pick people's brains all the time, which is kind of cool. So I got a lot of the same feedback. But I thought it was really interesting that the first thing anybody said to me was parking. That's all anybody cares about downtown as far as the relation to being in the restaurant. If they're on the way home, I have a lot of guests that would rather sit at happy hour with me than sit on Hobart for an hour to try and get out of town. So I noticed just for my own personal information, but my happy hour numbers we get a hit because of traffic, which that's kind of the idea, but being on both sides of the issue right now, it's something that I didn't think about until we were talking about it, because people would much rather sit and watch ESPN for an hour than sit in the traffic just to get through town. Kind of touching on how many people are just trying to get home versus I'm trying to get home, but it's still going to take me 45 minutes to get home because I live in Issaquah. Another one with people that live downtown, they want it to stay looking like Old Town, but they want us to build more roads. But they don't have any options. I was like, well, where do we put a new road if you want to build it, So
Flyovers.
Right. I think a lot of it is just, well, we're paying for stuff, so I want to see stuff in front of me and I want to be able to use it versus actually thinking through, how can we calm traffic, or can we push it somewhere else if we provide a transit center in a different spot? Adding lanes, especially on Front Street, and I had the same conversation. It's like, it's historical buildings. Where would you like this extra lane?
On the sidewalks.
Right. But safety was never an issue. Nobody really was concerned about walking around downtown. I think it's a little dark personally, just working in Old Town where I'm at. If you have to walk around the back of a building, it sometimes can be a little dark. But as far as getting around safely, I think we're doing an okay job at the moment downtown as far as the public's concerned. I didn't get the feeling that people were really concerned about just being a pedestrian. It was more, I can't find a parking spot when I try and come down and hang out. So I thought that was a little bit interesting that non-moving vehicles were more important than anything else in Old Town specifically.
Yeah, I'll attest to the parking. Just for example, coming down, we do the open mic here at the railroad station. You can't even find a parking spot, so people don't want to park a couple blocks away and carry their instruments and stuff to it. So it's just hampers like little community things that happen downtown. So where I live, out in the foothills, is probably the three major things. One is everybody wanted to fix the right turn lane at Newport going on to Wildwood. And that is making there are two lanes there, and making the right lane, right turn only, so that people can live all up Squawk Mountain, can make a right turn, not have to sit behind everybody else that's occupying that lane that's blocked by the intersection between there and Issaquah Harbor Road to go out that way. Like everybody is asking, why can't that be done? And the other complaint was just being able to get across town to the other side, whether it's their Costco, PCC, Home Depot, Lowe's, stuff on the other side, or to go out to 900 to get on the freeway to go into Seattle, that the traffic is just backed up almost more so on the weekend for longer lengths of time than it is during the day, during the peak hour.
You talking north-south, get across, so get on the other side of I-90 or get east-west?
Yeah, to get from this side of the 90 to the other side of 90. It's just that both the Front Street intersection or intersection interchange and the 900 interchange just always backed up. And there's a general feeling that the new undercrossing is kind of like our secret way to get to there, and don't let anybody else know. Kind of thing.
I was going to say, that's a great cheap way to get across town.
know.
I use that all the time.
It really is.
But I'm very happy that that's opened up, because that allows access to the other side and has been discovered by everybody else yet. But those are the main thing was just the the traffic. And I think the thing on Newport is because of all the pass-through traffic, that people will start going home when they're coming from Seattle, or from the parking ride lot, up over the mountain, Squack Mountain, the back roads, Mountainside View Drive, and coming down the backside, because they can't do Newport. And then the other thing, an example that I'll probably take from my wife, is just being able to, like when she meets me downtown sometimes, it's like very flustered about how to get to the Trans Center, where to park, how to take the bus, how to pay for the bus and use a card. So I'm thinking education, so people can understand how they can use multiple modes and where they can park and use transit. So, and just being able to understand how it works on the other things as opposed to not knowing. So therefore, not use it, I'll drive because I know how to do that, as opposed to making it easier for them to use another mode.
In any of your conversations, first, thank you. That's actually I took a lot of notes on all of that. In any of your conversations, did anyone talk about transit? Yeah.
We talked about transit.
Was it more on the positive or the negative side of things?
So for the people I talked to, they're regular users of the Issaquah Park and Ride, and then the two people I spoke with, or two of the people I spoke with, they commute daily to downtown Seattle from the Issaquah Park and Ride. So, they're commuting in the peak windows, Monday through Friday. They can always find a parking spot, and they found the transit system to be very efficient. And because they've been commuting forever, they kind of, they have a pass, they know the drill, so they really liked that. One of them was not excited about light rail because he was saying that he was looking at the travel times, and the travel times are supposed to get longer after light rail is put into place. And he's like, well, how is that? How is that? It's going to get longer. I'm like, I don't know, but you have till 2041. Hopefully you'll retire, but like, don't worry. But so far, they're very happy with the bus system and the bus service. But again, they're, peak commute. It's kind of a different thing than trying to get somewhere in the middle of the day. No.
To answer that question, actually, the delay or the difference in time actually has to deal with, there's a transfer now at Eastgate or in Bellevue. Light rail is not going directly to Seattle, it stops in Bellevue. And so having to do that transfer, it's actually quicker now to get to Bellevue with light rail, but once you get to Bellevue, you have to transfer, and then their expectation for traffic is going to get worse by 2041. So that distance between Bellevue and downtown Seattle is going to get worse. And so that's where that time
that little extra
decrease is coming from. It's not a huge decrease,
No.
but there is a decrease.
Yeah, I actually, in my conversations, I found that a lot of people mentioned transit's really nice for getting out of Issaquah or coming into Issaquah from faraway places, but getting around Issaquah via public transportation isn't as nice as they'd want it to be.
Did anyone talk about non-motorized travel? So there was some kind of safety concerns expressed, but in terms of access to a bike or having access to sidewalks or facility, like using the infrastructure, was there any concerns or anything talked about in your conversations with other people? Saying, yeah, I would have ride my bike, but there's no bike lane near my house, so I don't. That kind of conversation.
Yeah, one of the people that I talked to, they ride a bike to and from school every single day, just because traffic is so bad and they can get there faster. And one of their concerns was he lives up Squack Mountain, and then there are no trails and it's hard to see when it's darker, and that the drivers are kind of mean when he's biking around, so.
Okay.
Does he bike? Does he go down all the way down to Wildwood to Newport and over, or does he cut back through the trail through Sycamore?
I think he goes all the way down. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, kind of highlights from the conversations? We'll move on to the planning documents next, but I want to make sure we get everything else
I'd say probably the only other comment was that there's a fair number of people in our neighborhood. It's about a mile from where we are to downtown Issaquah, but they all walk it because they're going by the back trail that's back by the old railroad trade trail, or just down Wildwood, because it's a fairly pleasant walk. And there's the separated sidewalk that's separated from the road for most of that piece that's coming down.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Maddie.
I think this was something that was pretty apparent in a lot of our conversations, just like a lack of education about transportation. And I'm sure this is a problem for every single like city council board there is out there about education about their topics. But for a lot of my interviews too, when I asked about like how is traffic, and a lot of people mentioned like widening the roads, and it isn't like known to them that that's not always the most viable option. And so just something that I noticed was an area of improvement in helping people better understand transportation in Issaquah and what's being done right now. And
Okay. Thank you all. Do you want to move on to the planning documents now? Is that
That's good.
however you want to do that?
Yes, sounds like everybody's nodding that we're ready to move on. That was good work. I think it was a good assignment. I almost think we should, I don't know, do it every year at least. I mean, or just have it routine, but I think it's good outreach in general, and good habit, so, yeah.
Yeah, we can look at trying to do
I always have
different
all
things like
kinds of
that.
ideas
Yeah.
that I forget about, so I don't know, we probably forget, but if you think of it, it'd be good to do every time we have a winter break, maybe.
But to review other documents or?
No, I'm sorry, I'm specifically talking about asking other people, interviewing other people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you talk to these people presumably all the time, but, you're bothered to tell them that you're serving, and, you're asking about these specific things, I don't know, I thought it was really useful.
Okay.
So, I'm ready, I think we're ready to move on, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move on to kind of the first question. Did you find any opportunities when you were looking at other planning documents in terms of like coordination with other planning documents? Were there goals or anything specific that you saw in other planning documents that you saw, hey, we would love to work on something like that, or we would want to coordinate with something like that? Did you see anything like that when you're looking through the other plans?
Yeah, let me start. If we're just talking about looking at the Kirkland, the Redmond, and the Olympia, I kind of looked at Kirkland as probably being more like us as far as more of a community, where I think Redmond's got a bigger employment. And it's kind of, they've got a mall, they've set up a little differently, so it's kind of thinking that in mind. And they both have some really interesting ways they put together, but Kirkland, they emphasize there is safety is number one. It's like number 8 in Redmond. Then safe sidewalks, and so this is their priorities. It was safety, safe sidewalks, so it's almost like priority of safety to what's the most dangerous thing you can do. So safety, sidewalks, biking, transit, vehicle circulation, transportation systems. I have to put my glasses on so I can read my writing. Kind of a transportation system that matches their land use, then environmental sustainability, which I thought was kind of far down the road, and then being an active partner with everything else that's going on in the area as well. But I like the way that they had it laid out. I like the way that I noticed that their parks were kind of all broken up and there's no connectivity between those. And I like the way that I think we're trying to look at how to connect the parks and have it as both a continual park, but also a way to walk through a park to go someplace to another place. Like on their, they talked about, I like how they put some of the bike things and whether they classify it as being a shoulder or a lane or a shared lane or a bike-specific lane. And they also talked about the parking, which is kind of making me think about the downtown Issaquah parking. And they had the 10-minute neighborhood concept, where you can walk from someplace and be 10 minutes to be within downtown, which is about a quarter-mile walk. And I was trying to think how that work here if you have kind of a downtown core, but then you got people up on the hill, and then you got people up on that hill. So you kind of may not be able to match that exactly where Kirkland, once you kind of go up 100th, I think it's 100th, it's kind of a gradual hill, but it's a little relatively flat on the side. There's not like a major hill valley and a major hill, kind of like what we have. So I'm not sure how that will work, but I like how they addressed it as far as that being important. So if you live someplace, you can be 10 minutes from going to get something to eat or going downtown to walk, going to the library, whatever it might be. So I liked how I think that's an important thing to think about. And then it's also, Kirkland's kind of linear, I think, going north to south. And so it's very different how they can stretch things out like that and look at their total neighborhood in the downtown. And then kind of the Bothell, I'm not sure if it's called the Bothell Landing. So kind of 3 different areas. But we're kind of more of a circular, oblong, kind of a square blocks circular. So it's not really everything would be coming to a center point.
Yeah,
a blob. Then I'm not sure if we just want to talk about one town and then I'll talk about the next town, or just go on to other. And I don't want to occupy the whole time.
Well, we have plenty of time, and I guess I would just propose that we just do what we just did, but just do it in reverse and share all your thoughts. Is that okay? Or did you want to, well, I guess you wanted to talk about opportunities, then advantages and disadvantages.
I was trying to put just questions in your mind of highlights of what you saw out of the plans, things you liked, things you didn't like, just to help us identify major themes, whether it come from the planning documents or what you kind of are expecting from the mobility master plan for us.
I have one just real quick from an opportunities perspective, the changing the Valley for the green necklace plan. The city, I think the Parks Department put this together, the Central Issaquah Park Plan. And so it was kind of cool going back to, because I noticed in Kirkland it was a little disconnected from the way they do their green space, but this is sort of this idea of taking our green space in the city and connecting it. And so, you know, it's for recreation, but could it not be used for mobility as well? And they have all these great little routes they've identified and priorities they've identified. And I just wonder if, you know, when some of us got together to talk about non-motorized mobility options, I was thinking, oh, I wish I'd seen this. This would have been maybe helpful, because I guess they hired a consultant to do some of this work. So, and I can't remember if we've talked about this in this meeting before, but it felt new to me. So anyway, that could be a potential opportunity to coordinate.
Did you have other opportunities? Why don't we just do opportunities and then?
I have to think about these, how to say it as an opportunity. It's just observations as I was going through it.
Okay.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be opportunities to
Yeah.
it's just highlights that you saw in the plans. Yeah.
Because I think we all have a lot to say, so, and we do have, we're doing just great on time.
If you want to do just highlights of what you saw from
Yeah.
each city, that's
Yeah.
fine too, and work down the line. That would probably be easier.
I thought Kirkland's comment and their diagrams and figures of pollutions and particulates was a little bit better done than the city of Redmond's was. Kind of had to, took me a while to find it in Redmond's. And then there are priorities addressed by modes in Redmond. It's very interesting because they're both had similar information, but it was presented very differently. And I thought Kirkland's flowed better. I like how Redmond had at the very beginning had their table of contents, tables and figures. So in 3 separate figures, so it's very easy to go find something that you're looking for. And then Redmond did have an OD study in theirs, which I thought was interesting as far as how many people coming in and going out between communities and areas.
What did you call it?
An O&D, origin
Oh, origin
destination.
destination, okay.
Yeah, a long time ago, we used to do those manually, where we would basically tag license plates, and then we'd go through the state to find the resident of the license plate, so we know where people were coming from. Yeah, it took a little bit more work than cell phone technology of today. Okay, that's right now.
What about you, Stephanie?
I have to bow out on this one. I did not have time to go through the plans. I apologize.
Well, I'm glad you said it before me. I actually spent most of my time on Kirkland, and I didn't do the rest of the assignments, so thank you for saying that. I'm sure we can submit other comments if we want to later on. I did want to say that I liked a lot of things about the Kirkland plan. I liked how initial conditions was represented spatially with a lot of graphics. I thought that made it really easy to understand what they're even talking about. I thought the chapter on beginning chapter 1 was a good organizing principle. I thought that, let's see, I thought a couple of things to think about that I want to make sure that we're conscious of. And this is my communications background coming in here, but I think it's really important to understand who our audience is. And I think as the plan is being developed, in a way, the audience is council because they have to adopt the plan. But in the end, the audience is going to be staff and anybody that just wants to, the casual observer that just wants to look at it. But I think the reason I mention that is because what I didn't like about the Kirkland plan was the opening dove right into the purpose, but the purpose was kind of muddled, and it kind of went right into multimodal. It kind of went right to the solution in the opening of the purpose. And the reason I'm mentioning this is I think this is a piece of, it's a planning document, it's a guideline, it's also a piece of communication. And I think that what's really important is framing the problem we're trying to solve. And I think that many of the people we endeavor to serve have that mentality of it's all about getting my car through, and the way we are going to be successful is if we frame the problem and the solution then becomes these other investments in these other modes. But when you lead with the solution, I think it could be off-putting, and it could be like, I don't know what the rest of this document is, but it sounds like it's about other things besides what I care about. And I think that if we can scroll back to the goals that we started with at the beginning and really frame the problem that this document, so there's two ways to approach the purpose page, and one is functionally, what is the purpose? It's a guiding document, it's required by GMA, blah, 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 like just institutionally what the purpose is, but also what the goals are of the plan in general and the vision. And I think to launch right into solutions, and that's really what talking about multimodal is really about, your answer. But I think we have to make sure we understand where our audience is coming from. And I think if our audience is sitting in a certain place, then if we start with that approach, it's going to be hard to get anybody to continue to wade through this material. And I think that it matters how we characterize what it is that we think should be done, and really be mindful of the goal is to move people through. The goal isn't to get everybody out of their cars, right? So.
So are you thinking like right in their table of contents where they have the goal and the policies just like right off the bat?
I was talking about one of the first narratives. I don't have it printed out here. I was just looking at it online, but is purpose in the Kirkland plan. It's like one of the first places you can start reading. I mean, there's table of contents and lists of figures and so forth. But when you first start reading, you go right to purpose, and it goes right into what I would argue is more the solution, as opposed to really, I just think it's really critical we frame the problem in a way that is going to be inclusive and with a really good awareness of who our audience is. And so recognizing that there's content that's driving policy, but it's also a communication piece, right? And so I do think it matters. And I had lots of notes about specifically where I thought, like, kind of recognizing that congestion, like what we can expect, that congestion is inevitable, and that solving congestion in and of itself isn't necessarily the goal. There's always going to be congestion. That can't be the metric, right? There's always going to be congestion on Front Street. And if you add more lanes, in 10 years, there's going to be the same amount of congestion because it's going to fill up again. So just, there were I wrote a lot of notes about where I thought that would come into play if we were thinking about our audience and what we were trying to communicate and how we were trying to, if we were trying to frame the problem and then lead to the solutions. I'll stop there.
So for me, I completely spaced and didn't read the Olympia one. I only read the Redmond and the Kirkland one. I don't know. I was like, there was an Olympia one when you two were talking about it. I'm like, there was an Olympia one? I missed it. But then I read the Green Necklace and did a good job on that one. But so the Kirkland one I thought flowed better and read better just in general. I liked all their graphs and pictures. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of time to read a lot of text anymore, so they're just kind of visually the way, not what they were communicating, but the way they were communicating in the Kirkland plan was a lot more compelling, and I was more willing to try to dive in because I was like, oh, there's a lot of pictures. Okay, I can try to get through this in a reasonable amount of time versus, a lot of dense text. But the Redmond plan, I agree. I think the Redmond plan was, so that's therein lies the rub. The Redmond plan had a lot more information about the why we're doing this, why we ask these compelling questions, why it just felt more as a person who sits in traffic, you read this plan and you're like, okay, they understand what my problem is, and now, so they shape the problem better, and now these are the different kinds of solutions they have. And I thought, I can't remember if it was Redmond or Kirkland who talked about like kind of that climate impact stuff as far as carbon emission, all the, kind of the health impacts of, I can't remember which one of those two plans talked about that, or maybe it was both of them, but.
They both did, just.
Oh, was it both of them?
Yeah.
Okay, but I thought that information was also, as much as you want to talk about, making sure your system is built safe, or you're making sure this or that, just sort of that definition of safety and including that human health impact or human health element to it and climate element to it was, I think, really important, especially when we're talking about 20 years into the future. So.
I thought Kirkland had a better explanation, I think, what you're thinking of as far as.
Maybe it was Kirkland. Yeah, because it was with the carbon one, because I felt like I only saw it in one plan, but I can't remember which one, so it must have been Kirkland that did a better job. But yeah, so more pictures, but more information. Can you make that happen?
I'll get right on it.
It's super short.
We'll say Redmond is like 280 some odd pages.
I know, that was, that's where I was like, no, I think I started reading chat. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, but really comprehensive at the same, that's where I was like, oh, I'm torn.
Yeah. I also noticed the safety aspect. And so I think it's really important that you have that human element into it, that like some of the documents seem to prioritize like people and health and like their issues that were in their cities. I did like all the pictures though. I'm a very visual person, but I also like all the statistics. So like when I see numbers, I really like grab on to them, especially like in a sea of words. I'm like, oh, like they're talking about emissions. They're talking about like how this will affect the future in these ways. And so I think also having a lot of background, like you mentioned, is really beneficial. I liked that. And then also looking at Issaquah's strategic plan, kind of, I liked how that flowed a lot. So I don't know if there's like some way to incorporate how our strategic plan is kind of based, like structured into the way that our master mobility plan is structured. But I thought that one was the easiest to kind of follow, to read. I liked all the colorful circles, all of like, yeah, that was laid out. And then I did like the parking. I saw the parking and I was like, oh, that's good. So I was like, we need to do that too.
Well, I focused a lot on the Olympia master plan, actually. And I think my first comment about that was just the layout of it. So when you click on it, it leads you to a separate page, and it's just one continuous scroll through page, and it leads you through the problems. And in that sense, it was really accessible. And I think if we want to increase education about transportation, about what our board is doing, that is a really easy format for people who might not be motivated to read 200 pages to kind of get an understanding. But I think it also was not as detailed as some of the other plans were, and that's something that I do think is important as well. And something I also noticed about Olympia was they constantly referred back to performance metrics. So they had a few sample projects and then gave the rating on their performance metrics scale to show why those projects were important to their goal. And so constantly kind of bringing it back to their goals through the performance metrics. And so I thought that was really cool too. And they had a part about, because I remember earlier we were talking about how a lot of people would mention that they wanted to ease traffic by adding lanes, and actually Olympia talked specifically about adding roundabouts to each traffic rather than adding lanes, just adding roundabouts. So I thought that was interesting and specific to Olympia.
For those who didn't see look at the Olympia one, they have an interactive website showing a story map of their plan. So instead of clicking on and you open up a PDF or for the planning document, the website itself actually has each of the chapters and policies laid out, which is what Maddie was talking about. So it's really easy to explain, really easy to follow, and it's very visual. So it's an option that we can look into kind of the future. Not right now, but as part of the plan is how do we visually communicate how this document is really planning for the transportation system for the future.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting because I panned all the way down through it looking, well, maybe the PDF link's at the bottom of it. I realized it wasn't, so I went back to the top and then.
You're like, oh, that was the plan.
No, I did the same thing because I was looking for the PDF link. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to go through in terms of like your document review? Is there anything that stood out to you when you're looking at the existing planning documents of, hey, we didn't actually talk about that yet? Those kind of light bulb moments.
I think the climate one, I mean, we haven't talked about kind of impact to climate or, the city's, I don't know if the city's part of K4C or what our climate goals are, any of that, but the tie to transportation and climate, I don't think we've discussed that yet. Then I think you guys mentioned parking too. I think that was true.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The one comment I'll add to Olympia, and just because I worked down there for about 4.5 years, is they don't mention anything about the Amtrak station. So, and if they're going to go intercity, there's no communication. It's all seemed to be about the town, but not, what are they doing if they're going elsewhere. So I was thinking, okay, well, I know we don't have an Amtrak station here, rail station, but are there other things that are local that we could have or might have a couple years down the road that we should be thinking about now and include that in it? I was kind of thinking that that's kind of on the outskirts of town, so that's not really where we're talking about, just the downtown, as opposed to looking at the bigger picture in a way.
Okay. So I do have feedback from Nina, even though she wasn't able to come tonight. I don't know, Cynthia, if you wanted to read her notes or if you want me to. She strongly emphasized safety as well, as many of you did. She really liked Kirkland's emphasis on safety, where it was the #1 chapter. It was addressed in each of the chapters following the first chapter of, safety is important. This is why it's important. This is how we're going to address it. And then each of the following chapters talking about auto movement or bicycle or pedestrian. This is how we're going to address safety for each of these modes. And this is the steps we're going to follow. And she definitely liked the chapter on motor vehicles and the coordination with land use, but also making sure that safety is emphasized as part of that too. That's one thing that's always forgotten when we're having the conversation about auto. It's typically delay or volume, and not everyone talks about the safety element of, well, if we're going to have that as the number one priority, we need to talk about what the impact is on those other aspects people talk about. In the Redmond planning document, she liked the multimodal chapter where it talked about the coordination between the different modes and the right-of-way, how it's used, but also how Redmond prioritized maintenance and not just capacity when it came to maintenance. And again, safety for all users. And she liked the environmental section where water quality was noted as the number one priority, is making sure it's healthy. And the last part is emphasis on parking. That's a major concern for everybody. And that's something that we heard last year when we were going through engagement was, we need to address parking, or at least we need to do something about it because people are getting frustrated when trying to access, like what you all experienced or what you heard in your conversations with your neighbors or your colleagues. And then that's it. I'm sure she'll tell us more later, but that's at least what she sent me. Are there any questions about the homework or anything that kind of stands out when you're going through a lot of this, all of the planning documents? Anything you would like to see in our planning document, in the mobility master plan? I know you talked about parking, you talked about climate and the human element in it all, but is there anything specific that you saw that you really liked?
Just a comment, I saw that Fears and Peers was doing some of the other ones, so do they have a lot of input as far as traffic into ours as they do on the other ones as well?
Yes.
I forgot what I was
And Fair and Peers is our consultant helping us develop the plan.
I know what I was going to say. I did make a comment that I liked the graphic representation of initial conditions, but I also felt like, and maybe I just didn't read thoroughly enough, but sometimes it didn't make clear what the implications were of that. So it was really easy and accessible because it was graphical, but then it sort of left me like a little bit, so what? And so maybe embellishing a little bit, making it longer. Yeah.
I know.
But yeah, I thought that was like drawing some conclusions. So a kind of a hybrid would be kind of nice.
So visual communicates everything, but not as long.
Yeah. I also really liked, and you mentioned it, Tom, there was the hierarchy, the safety, and the way that the modes, and it, to me, when I was reading that, I was thinking like it was like a hierarchy of vulnerability.
Yeah.
You're the most vulnerable if you're walking or, or riding, and that's easy to understand, and easy to understand why you would prioritize that, especially in the context of safety.
I'm wondering for our documents, we were talking about layout just now. I think, is it possible to do like a version similar to Olympia's, like the easy to read scroll through, but then also have a comprehensive document in case you only want to read about the safety or the parking aspect of it, and it can go into depth in just that area in a PDF, but also have a overall like very visual website type thing.
I like the strategic plan, almost, like where you click a tab and it opens up a specific area, but it also gives a general overview.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
You guys have anything else? Well, I'm impressed with this group and the depth that you guys went to, so that's great. I imagine, so Who else? Who else is not here this evening?
Nina, Marisol, and Kobe.
Okay, right. Did he, I know he said he wasn't going to be able to make it. Did he send any notes?
He didn't. I'm gonna follow up with him.
Okay.
What I think I'll do is I'll probably summarize my notes and send them to Steve and CC you and Nina as the chair and co-chair.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason we can't submit additional comments? Yeah,
Nope.
okay. Great.
No, we're not taking action on anything, so if you have follow-up comments or questions, I'm happy to answer.
Ongoing discussion. Good, well, it sounds like we're ready to move on to item 4.5, reports. Do we have a staff report?
For staff report, two things kind of related to each other. Sheldon is retiring, our Public Works Director is retiring, and Kurt is going to be filling in for him as our interim director for the next while.
Congratulations.
The two jobs at the same time? Okay.
I don't know, is there anything else, Kurt, that you wanted to, okay, so
What is Sheldon's last day?
this Friday.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
This Friday?
Yeah, he made an announcement right after our last meeting, so there's been no opportunity to tell you all. So he did make it a while ago. It wasn't on a 2-week notice or anything.
Surprise.
Chair's report, we don't have a chair's report.
No.
Chair's report, did Nina have anything that she wanted to share?
She didn't have anything to share, at least not in the email. And for a youth report, Kopi's not here, but if you have anything to report on, Maddie or
Yeah.
Emma, in terms of like what's going on in the high schools or anything related going on in the community?
Yeah, so this isn't particularly high school related. It's just something that I've been working on with the city arts coordinator, Amy Dukes. We're in the process of putting a pedestrian mural in the trail that goes under the new roundabout. And then we're still working out a few of the details, but we're hoping to get everything going and get the painting started by spring, and we're hoping to get a big community turnout for that. And so hopefully to increase like youth awareness of like the new trails, and then also that it's an option for them to use. And then hopefully through a mural that we can promote pedestrian traffic as well in the Issaquah area. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other business, is there any other business or announcements? Well,
Nothing for me?
unless there's nothing else, just the next meeting is February 24th,
Yep.
right here. Never know the names of these rooms. This is council chambers, okay?
Is it here?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that reminds me, I assume that, because at first there was a couple meetings that were elsewhere, but you'll tell us in bold, in the subject line, you'll remind us if
Yes.
there's a meeting somewhere else. And there was some talk at some point about changing our regular
Yeah.
meeting night.
Yes, so I was actually going to ask about that. We were trying to look at different dates that don't conflict with council meetings and any other boards or commissions meeting that meet in this room. And there aren't a lot of options. And the best date that works for you, that in the survey that we had put out, the best date that works for you actually is a conflict with council meetings. So we're not sure if changing the date is really going to make
What
that
were we
much
trying to
sense.
solve for when we first started talking about
We were
changing
trying
the
to reduce the number of conflicts we were having with either the council meeting or holidays. This year, we're having a conflict with 2 holidays and maybe 1 or 2 council meetings. And that would push us either to the Pickering Room at City Hall Northwest or over across the street at the Eagle Room. So if you want me to look more into just moving us to a different date, but I know people's availability decreased as we moved
Yeah.
away from Monday. That was also the other issue, is anytime we tried to go to Tuesday or Wednesday, the number of people available decreased. And I didn't want to propose something when half the people couldn't go.
So one question I have is, 2 meetings is 1/6 of our meeting schedule, which is probably not good if we're trying to get a mobility master plan out. Do we maybe want to, can we, and should we move just those meetings to the third Monday?
Yeah, we can look at that.
How does that
Yeah.
work for you guys?
Schedule
First and third.
them
As
now.
long as it's a Monday, I can make that work.
Okay, and same here, so it sounds like there's 6 of us saying that the third Monday as an alternate for when it falls on a holiday. And if we get that on the calendar in advance, then we don't lose a whole month.
Third Mondays. That's the council meetings.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, if there was a conflict, but
That was the conflict with that day. That was the conflict.
that was the conflict. Okay, so I mean, maybe, I don't know if Tuesday after a Monday holiday is too difficult, or if there's a... So scratch that, the third Monday is a conflict.
Is it an issue if we look at the Pickering room for that third Monday?
I don't think the space matters.
No, I don't think the space matters, as long as you remind us.
Yeah.
Well, it was, the feedback we had gotten early on from everybody was that this location worked best for everyone, just because of access to the transit and the bike facilities leading up here. Auto, it doesn't really matter because you can drive to both places, but I was trying to respect that as much as I could.
Well, this room or across the street, is that where the Pickering room is?
No, the Pickering room is at the
It's the one by
other City
Michael's.
Hall.
That one just, because if you don't get there on time, you can't get in.
Oh. But if we're only talking about
Yeah, it's fine.
when
Yeah.
specific,
Just prop the door open.
Yeah, so for those couple dates, then
Yeah.
you want to look at that third Monday
Yeah, that's
in
totally fine.
the Pickering room?
would you guys rather do the third Monday in the is the day after the conflict or the day after the holiday, which would be the Tuesday? Is that even an option? Is that better? And is this room available? Would you rather stick with the same room but a different night?
What month are the
Assuming it's
conflicts?
Memorial Day?
The conflict with those dates is because the next available day is a Tuesday, that's when council has their study sessions.
Okay, so never mind. So we'll just go back to the third Monday.
Yeah.
Third Monday in Pickering room.
So in the
Look at
day,
that.
those would be, is it Memorial Day and what other, do you remember what the,
I don't remember what the other
Okay.
holiday is.
I'm just trying to think of holidays that are at the end of the month.
Anyway, I'll update the calendar invites that I have to all of you with the correct locations.
February 24th
thank you.
is not President's Day.
No, it's not. That's what I had just asked her. I was like, is February 24th President's Day?
No, I think it's the 17th.
17th.
Yeah, I think it's easier to get us all to the Pickering room than it is to try to find a different date.
Yeah.
I think that's what the
I
conclusion
agree.
is here.
Okay. So keep same time, third Monday, Pickering room.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for the 2 holiday weeks, we can just try to,
Oh. 2 times in 2020? The only one I found on my calendar was December 28th and May 25th.
Yeah, those are the two.
Oh,
The 2 holidays and I think 2 or 3 council meetings. Those were the conflicts.
okay. Yeah, so the holidays, we should try to calendar, even though end of December is bad. But the May meeting, maybe, we can try to.
yeah. So the December would be the 21st, which isn't as bad as right in the middle. But we should pencil it in, and if the schedule allows us, and everyone just seems to want to have a break again, or
Okay.
we don't know where we'll be in December of 2020 in terms of like these deliverables, and we may just want to finish powering through. So it'd be good to pencil it in.
Okay. All right, that works.
Yeah. May would be the third.
It'll be the
right?
third Monday.
So in May, that would be the 18th.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I know you're not looking at your calendar, so if something comes up, we can revisit this later on too. Okay.
But for now, should we say that's our, unless otherwise?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't hear you.
Are we still keeping the February date, because the 17th holiday?
We're not changing, we're going to continue with the fourth Monday, except in May, we're going to move to the third Monday, and in December, we'll move to the third Monday. So May 7th.
Otherwise, no
February
dates
17th is not, we don't meet on that day. We weren't scheduled to meet on that day. That's the third Monday.
Yeah.
We're just changing location.
In February, on the 24th?
No, not in February, in the conflict days.
On the conflict days, right.
Okay, that's all the questions I got.
Great.
I had one more question just about membership renewal. So
Yes.
for the new year,
Oh, yeah, and board members.
if we're expiring 2020, is that, when does that technically expire and what is the process to?
So there's an application, I think the same application you have to submit for the city clerk. And even though year 2 or 4 year hasn't been fully expended, we still have to submit the application because of the expiration date. But what we submit as part of the application review is that you have not actually gone through your full 2 or 4 year process, and that'll be included as part of the application review process.
When do those due? Have we gotten?
I'm going to send the links out to you following today, but they're due in February.
Oh, okay. And if you're not expiring until like 2022, do you?
You don't need to worry about it, yeah.
They're just staggered terms so that
Yep. That way we're not
we're not
going
everybody
through
meeting at the
this.
same
Yes.
time. Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
There's no mass
I
exodus.
expire. Yeah.
Yeah, so with the expirations and the 3 vacant positions, that's what we're working with. Okay.
Well, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. All in favor? Do we vote? I don't know. We just adjourn. Oh, here. There we go. We're done.
You got to bang the gavel.
I don't know if there's just a big.
Oh.